Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.
Happy holiday. Happy holiday. Happy holiday. While the merry bells keep ringing. Happy holiday. And Santa Claus is coming round. The Christmas snow is white on the ground. When old Santa gets in town, he's coming down the chimney down. It's the holiday season, and Santa Claus has got a toy for every good girl and good little boy. Santa's a great big bundle of joy when he's coming down the chimney down.
From Omaha, Nebraska, the capital city of the historic haunted heartland, my name is Brian Corey, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all, y'all, to this episode of Necronomicast. Episode 241 finds us having a conversation with one of my favorite authors working today, Mr. Troy Taylor. Troy is back with a brand new book entitled One Bleak Midwinter Night, Terror and Tragedy of the Holiday Season. With this book, Troy revives the tradition of the haunted holiday season, dark tales. We're talking missing children, murders, fires, deaths, pagan celebrations, you name it, you've got it. Here with Troy Taylor on this episode of Necronomicast. And now calling in on the Necronomicast hotline, I've got him here from Illinois, a friend of the program. I'm so excited to welcome back Troy Taylor. Troy, how you doing?
Good, and I'm always happy to come back. So this is, you're one of those people I make the rare exception of recording at night with. So, yeah, absolutely. It's, when it's your day job, last thing you want to do is do this at night. So here I am. But no, I like being here. It's a fun show to do. I always recommend it to people.
That's great, man. And like I've said a couple times on this show, not just when you're here as a guest, like one of my favorite books of the last couple of years that I've had the opportunity to talk to the author about was Song of Dance and Death. Your fantastic book about just all the tragedy that's happened in the music biz. Amazing book, and you've done it once again with your new book.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. This was a book that I've been wanting to do for years. I mean, I've been trying as far back as I can remember. When I've been in this business and writing, I've been trying to convince people that Halloween is the start of spooky season, not the end. That winter is when, all the ghosts really come out. That's when we want to talk about ghosts. And, our ancestors were doing it, but somehow we've gotten away from it. And I've been trying to bring that back. So this was a book that was long in the making. So I was happy to finally get it out this year.
Well, I was really excited when I saw that you were, dropping hints about what you were writing and getting ready to release, because like you just said, Halloween isn't the end of the spooky season. It's like the beginning of the spooky season, just like you said. And your book, I got it right here, One Bleak Midwinter Night. We're on a kind of a bleak midwinter night that we're talking here tonight on here in December, but what a fantastic book. I was so excited when you were, kind of teasing that this book was coming out, because as a podcast host, I've wanted for years to have a show about the spooky season of the holidays and the tradition of the stories, and how everything from the pagan roots of the Christian holidays to, how the agricultural society kind of fueled a lot of these scary things, and how these spooky things, people hunkering down in the wintertime when it's cold outside and not getting out much. And it just kind of lends itself to this isolation, to these spooky, scary, and sometimes just tragic stories. So my wife was like, "Why? Holiday season, Christmas,
I know.
Hallmark Channel." And I'm like, no. I've wanted to talk to somebody about this kind of stuff for years, and Troy Taylor's put the book together. So I'm so excited about that.
I think that you hit the nail on the head when you said agricultural society. I think that's what's gotten us away from it, is because our country, over time became much more and more urban and less rural, that we just sort of lost these traditions. And, we started focusing, daylight savings time. When you ask most people, they have absolutely no idea what it is other than an annoyance. Mm-hmm. They don't understand how important it was to the farmers of the past. And so I think as we've gotten away from that, we've gotten away from a lot of the things that we used to do. When you think, oh, what's the great Christmas story? Well, everybody thinks of the Christmas Carol. Well, hello, that's a ghost story. That is the ghost story, the Christmas ghost story. And there are tons of them out there. And that was, you don't find a lot of classic Halloween ghost stories because there aren't any. Mm-hmm. It's just become, as things have changed their focus. And, I just feel like that I don't think there's a scarier time of year than winter. And what's the middle of winter but the holidays? And, the holidays were such a time to our ancestors of, looking at the dark side of everything, that we need to be doing the same thing, I think. So, here we are, back with the ghosts of the holidays. So,
yeah. Now this book just came out a couple weeks ago, and I was so excited to get my hands on a copy, and I plowed through it, man. And it's 360 some odd pages of small type. And it's so riveting. There's so many things. Like I said, we start off with, you're kind of talking about the traditions of the pagan roots, if I could call it pagan, but just kind of the old roots of the Yuletide season and how it kind of morphed into the Christian holidays and everything. And just everything about it. Like, how did you decide, like, I'm going to write a Christmas book, or I'm going to write a holiday book, or I'm going to write this thing about winter? Like, what was the genesis of it? Like, did you just think, I'm only going to write about, the history of it, or did it just kind of keep building and building and building? Like, how, as a guy that's not a writer, as a writer, how do you decide what makes the cut, or how do you shape a book?
Well, I'd always been fascinated in the whole idea of Christmas ghosts. And then that kind of turned into, how did all this get started? And, were our roots of the holiday season a lot darker than the Hallmark Channel? Yes, yes, and yes. And then, as I got older and I got more interested in how, the early church had co-opted so many of the holidays just to kind of wrangle everybody into their ranks, which, it makes sense. When the Norse invaded the Celtic regions, they pushed all their holidays and all their gods onto. So, that's how nature works. That's how civilization works, I guess. So, you could be resentful if you want to, but what's the point? It's all just going to be what it is. But it's interesting to see how it all got started. But that was not my initial plan. And so that just sort of became an introductory thing to the book, and the weird Christmas customs and, what's the meaning behind people sending Christmas cards with dead birds on them. It was just weird stuff,
right.
Odd things, why is a broom important, to Christmas? And well, to now it's not, but in some cultures it still is. And, those kinds of things just always interested me. So I thought, well, if I'm already going to be writing about how it all got started, I might as well include that stuff. And I'm going to include that stuff. Then I'm going to have to include some of the figures that are involved in this too, starting with how gruesome the stories are about Santa Claus. You could go back to Odin and say he's the kind of the genesis of Santa Claus, and say, and when you talk about the craziness of the wild hunt, and then suddenly he's stopping to drop presents in kids' shoes because the wild hunt was scaring the kids too badly. So now we got to come up with a different plan and make Odin a little nicer guy. And then eventually he changes into St. Nicholas, whose story is the most horrendous stuff you've ever heard. And he's a Christian saint, and he's putting dead bodies back together. And, this is Santa Claus here, folks. This is how it all started. So there's some crazy stuff, but then you got to start talking about all the monsters that everybody's come up with. And the funny thing is, most of those monsters were not like pagan inventions. They were stuff put together by the church to scare the hell out of people.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's send along Krampus. Oh, yes, he used to be a pagan god, but now he's, St. Nicholas's pal. And, St. Nicholas is going to give you some fun things and some treats and prizes and cookies and things if you're good. But if you're bad, well, then you got to talk to his friend. I mean, he was like a mafia enforcer of the medieval era, where they're going to bring him along and he's going to beat up kids who are bad. He's going to beat them with switches. And if they're really bad, he's going to kidnap them and put them in a basket and they'll never be seen again. Now, right. I mean, what says Merry Christmas about this? Nothing. This is terrifying stuff. And then every one of these figures is the same way. Oh, this guy's going to make you pray and you're going to have to get down on rocks and say prayers on your knees because, you didn't pray hard enough in the last year. And if you don't make an effort to pray, well, that's the end for you. I mean, come on. I mean, it's some grim stuff. But anyway, so I thought I should include all that stuff too, because it's scary. And then, one thing led to another. And I really wanted to just kind of look at the dark side of the holidays. I have a collection. It's pretty, essentially this book is it's a huge book, but it's like 3 chapters. That's like it. And it's all this stuff we just talked about. And then it's a whole bunch of murders that happened during the holidays, all of them kind of revolving around the holiday season. And then a whole bunch of horrible, awful tragedies where hundreds of people died or burned to death or something, all because they went to a holiday play in a lot of instances, Oh, yeah. So it's all, and people are like, why in the world would you write this? Well, for one thing, I was inspired because in the town I grew up in, when I was a kid where my parents still live, there had been a mine disaster on Christmas Eve. And it was a small town and like 52 men died in this disaster in this little town. And pretty much everyone in town had a friend or a relative that was involved or died during this disaster. And a lot of my really good friends I went to school with were, their grandparents had been immigrants who had died in this disaster. So it's like I knew all these people. And so that just always kind of, honestly, that we always put kind of Christmas Eve and a horrible mine disaster together. Mm-hmm. And that was just part of growing up in this town. It's just what you talked about. So it wasn't that far off for me to put those things together. And then a lot of my friends and relatives and even people I just knew talked about how for years, their parents, when their parents were kids, that their families used to be visited by these ghosts on Christmas. Well, those are some of the first ghost stories I ever collected when I was in high school. So that was just always part of my upbringing, part of my, becoming what I do now. That was all just sort of part of it. And the other thing is, a book like this, you put this together and you read these horrible things. And it's kind of a reminder that the holidays are bleak and they can be dark and they can be awful. But there's also, where there's a dark side, there's a light side. So there are good things about the holidays. This is just a reminder that you never want to take anything for granted because you might be the one sitting in the theater that catches on fire, instead of someone else. And so you're not. You're at home, you're enjoying your family and having dinner and having a good time instead. So that's something that's worth being thankful for. That's what I'm telling people. Really, I just want to tell really dark stories, but I'm telling them that remember so please don't tell anyone I told you that, Brian. I just, that's a secret. So.
Right. What I love about your writing and your books too, the ones that I've been able to read just since I started this show or whatnot, your emphasis on history. So yeah. So yes, we are telling pretty dark stories. Yes, you are writing about these things, but they are true stories. You were talking earlier about, Krampus and things like that. And it's interesting to see how, well, yes, Santa and his elves, and we have the Will Ferrell movie, and we have all these things, but yeah, it used to be if you were not a good Christian, or if you didn't say your prayers, or you weren't good during the year. Well, now you don't get what you want for Christmas. Back then, you risked, bodily injury, a beating, death, kidnapping. It was a lot more dire. So to watch that progression of how we've, kind of made Santa this jolly old elf, and then like you said, like these murders and everything, and they're cautionary tales. It's always like people at the wrong place, the wrong time. And these other stories where you start breaking off into tragedies and talking about all these things that happen, like these fires and the mining disasters and things. But it's also good to know where our laws and building codes and all these things that we take for granted.
Right.
The things that we take for granted, like why do we have doors that open out and not in? Why do we have, fire escapes that are measured by the amount of people that are in a room?
Just put on at all, so fire escapes that are actually on the building. So things like that,
Why do we have these things? Well, I'll tell you, on page 200 and something, we're going to talk about it. That's exactly why.
We're going to tell you why schools should have alarms and sprinkler systems, so I know.
Yeah. And like a lot of these cases, super important in terms of how they shaped a community or how they affected a community. But a lot of times, a guy here in almost 2023 reading these books, I didn't know about these things that happened in Chicago. A lot of Chicago stories.
A lot of tragedy. Yeah, a lot of tragedy.
And then things, all these things like, oh my gosh, like I was really broken up by the Gibbons murder, the Ashland Christmas tragedy from 1881 in Kentucky. These stories, like when you're going through and researching them, well, how do they make the cut? Or it did. It wasn't when I went through, it wasn't just, I'm just going to pick anything that happened in December. I mean, I a lot of stuff got passed along or turned down just because it wasn't. It was just terrible. I mean, not that these aren't terrible, but I wanted some history behind the stories. I wanted them to be able to say something, like this story of the Ashland tragedy. Here were some kids who should have been absolutely safe. I know, yes, they were left at home, but they were left at home under good care, and their mother would have been back, the following day. She'd gone away to visit, another daughter for the holidays and would have been returning. And, like you said, wrong place at the wrong time, except in this case, the wrong people just decided that they were going to break into a house one night. And instead of just robbing the place, committed an atrocity. I mean, it's difficult to explain why such things have to happen. But you'd like to say, well, here's an object lesson and why you should lock your doors. Well, we know this, we know this already, but in the 1880s, it wasn't always necessarily needed to lock all the doors because that wasn't the kind of society we had at the time. But honestly, we did. It's just that people chose to ignore it. We were a much more rural society at that time, and it was okay to leave your doors unlocked, living out in the middle of nowhere, or like in 1929 when Charlie Lawson just decides one day that he'd lost his mind and decided for an unknown reason still to slaughter his entire family. Well, what good would a locked door have done? Nothing, because the monster was already inside the house. I mean, that's a Christmas day that you can understand why the only survivor never really celebrated Christmas again in his lifetime. Would you? No, it's a terrible story. And I know you wrote this whole book. It's just one small part. So I don't want people to think, oh, well, we're giving all of away. I mean, this book has dozens and dozens of stories, but this one particular one that you just started talking about, guy snaps, kills his entire family, except he sends his son out I can't remember the errand, but he
gets shotgun shells. He told him they needed more shotgun shells, even though obviously he had plenty because he uses them. But he sent him away because his son was 16, big burly kid, and knew that he would do anything to protect his family because there'd already been a history of domestic violence in the family. But in 1929, all his neighbors, all his relatives, his brothers knew he beat his wife and kids, but you didn't do anything about that back then. That was someone else's business.
Yeah.
And you kept to yourself and you minded your own business back then. And, then when he snaps one day, everybody, well, first they're surprised and then suddenly they're thinking, where's Charlie? And they realize that it was he that committed all these murders. And they are brutal. I mean, the book has some brutality in it. There's no question. It's not for everybody, but reading, a reader's discretion is advised, but that's definitely the worst one. Because you've got kids that range from, age 18 all the way down to 4 months old.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know what happens to make somebody do that. It was theorized and I kind of go with the idea that, he was hearing some kind of voices in his head after he'd been hit in the head in an accident. His doctor said he had nervous troubles, and his wife had told her sisters about some of the things that he'd done that she'd seen. And so you kind of have to guess that he just lost his mind. But honestly, nobody knows for sure. I mean, and there were several theories as to why he annihilated his entire family on Christmas Day. But honestly, we'll never know. Not for sure. Which makes it even scarier.
Oh, sure, because you never know what's going on behind closed doors of your neighbor's
That's right.
house.
Right, in somebody else's head.
Yeah, and when you were mentioning his son, he was, beating his kids, beating his wife, and when his son, a farmhand, got to be 16, and he could stand up to his dad, and so, like you said, he sent his son out to go get more shells because we're doing some Christmas Day shooting and hunting, and his
gonna
dad
get a rabbit for the stew pot tonight.
Yeah, so the kid takes off, to go grab more shotgun shells, and he returns home to this massacre, and the bodies are not displayed, but they're
displayed really in repose. With their arms crossed and pillows under their head. And I mean, it's like he was doing him a favor. He I think probably felt like, for whatever bizarre thing that went through his head, that he'd saved his family in some way by murdering them. I don't know. But it's a crazy, horrific story. And, it's not surprising that when you get stories like that, it's not surprising when you end up with ghost stories that are connected to such events. The trauma, the events that happen leave an impression behind. And that's certainly the case in that story and in a lot of these stories, and I can't say that the holidays have anything to do with it, but they certainly add to the trauma, and they certainly add to, the feelings of shock that had to be experienced by anybody in any of these stories, because the last thing they expected during the Christmas season was, for, their family to be murdered, for their little girl to be kidnapped, or there's just no way to describe the feelings they must have experienced.
Oh man, when you were talking kidnapping, there's the story that you had in the book from 1927 in Los Angeles. Marion Parker.
I know.
When she was abducted from her school.
Yeah. And again, one of those things that, you think could never happen today. And then, just like you said earlier, there's a reason we have doors that open inward and stuff. Her kidnapper shows up at school and says, I work with, doesn't even know that they're twins, that she has a twin sister, and said, I need to pick up the Parker girl. I work with her father. He's been in an accident. And the school secretary says, well, which one? You mean Marion? And he says, oh, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Not even realizing there's two. Right. He only knew that the guy had a daughter. That's it. And she signs her out and sends her on her way with a man she's never seen before. And so I guess, you've got a school secretary who messed up and a little girl who walked away with a stranger, and that was the last time anybody ever saw her alive, aside from her kidnapper.
Sure. I mean, this was almost 100 years ago, and we think, tragedies in schools are just started with Columbine. And of course, that's a school shooter, a different kind of thing.
Right.
But the kid's still not safe in a school. I mean, called to the office and you're like, oh, you're going to go with your dad needs help, or your dad's been in an accident. This guy's going to, take you to him or take you to the family. And William Hickman, the guy that did all this, you laid out his story in great detail. And what a horrible tragedy. And just the mind games that he played with the family, demanding
yeah.
demanding ransom, and she was already pretty much taxidermied by the time he got
Yeah,
his
by
money.
the time that he got his money. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I don't even want to get into details here. I'll let people read it.
Yeah.
But what he did to her body is, I mean, that's not, again, you're not going to put that on a Christmas card. So,
No.
yeah. But imagine again, and the Parkers never celebrated Christmas again after that, and you can understand why.
And there's tales of murder. Like today, we're recording this on December 6th, and you had a Facebook post today. You have these great Facebook posts. If you're listening and you don't follow Troy on Facebook and Instagram, you need to, because he's not just posting pictures of his dinner or anything like that.
Yeah,
no. You almost get like pretty much like almost a daily what happened in the world of the bizarre or
yeah. I try to do it every day. I'll have an anniversary of something every day. Yes, there's something every day. So at least one thing or more. So
my pronunciation might be off, but today was the anniversary of the Los Feliz.
Los Feliz. It's a suburb of LA, and an affluent suburb of LA. And it's and people will recognize. It's popped up a few times over the years what people talk about. And the reason they talk about it is because there were murders happen there. But what made the house so eerie wasn't even that it was haunted, because it is said to be haunted. And I even talked to an LA County sheriff's deputy who told me about being called out to that house repeatedly for false alarms and things. But the house was, while sold, largely abandoned after the murders took place in 1959. And it was left exactly like it was. All of the family stuff still in it. The Christmas tree still in the living room, presents still under the tree that had never been opened. And the father, once again, in this case, a man named Harold Perelson, who was a really well-known cardiac surgeon who had invented a bunch of things and had a great company, and then got into like a kind of a rift with his partner, and his business just sort of spiraled out and it ended up in all kinds of legal cases and things. And he just lost it. I mean, he just lost his mind. And one night just decided to murder his whole family and beat his wife to death with a hammer, went after one of his daughters. But she survived the attack, got away from him, ran for help. And when he, I guess, realized that he wasn't going to be able to kill everyone, decided that he would just kill himself. So he committed suicide in the house. And, it not only marred the property forever. I mean, it's had a couple of owners, but until recently, no one's ever done anything with the house. They've never remodeled it, never used it, never lived in it. And then it was remodeled fairly recently, and then the owners ended up going bankrupt, and so the house is still in limbo even after all this time. And I mean, we're talking we're talking 60 some years, and it's just one of those kind of a cursed property, which, like I said, is said to be haunted. People have heard screams. They've seen Mrs. Perelson looking out a window upstairs. And like I said, I talked to a LA County sheriff's deputy who told me that she used to get calls all the time for the alarms. And of course, there would never be anybody inside. And that would happen on a regular basis. So yeah, it's just another one of those. I mean, the holidays are stressful. Don't they always tell us that, more suicides and depression and things happen during the holidays? Well, I guess we shouldn't be surprised by the kind of stuff that comes up, with some of these stories during the holidays.
I'm surprised how many unsolved mysteries and unsolved murders that you covered in this book. There's quite a few, like the 1938 murder of Margaret Martin. She was she was the secretary, just graduated from like business college, and she was meeting a man for a job interview and then she ends up
and no one knows why. That, I mean, it's terrifying that she was taken away and murdered, and they call it the sawmill murder, and I'll leave that to the listener's imagination. But the thing that's scary about it is that, yes, she'd gone away for this job interview, which turned out to be fake. Someone had obviously been stalking and targeted her. And we're talking about 1938 here. We're not talking about last year. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you see on the news now and you think, oh boy, our world is so messed up. But listen, it's been like this, the good old days weren't always good, and but what's scary about this is that we don't even know why he targeted her. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's scary. I mean, we don't know. I mean, she fell for it because it was a promise of a great job. I mean, how many times do you think that kind of thing has happened? Sure. Where people have graduated from this college and, they're on the line for a great job. They get a call for an interview and then they're just never seen again. I mean, how did this guy find her in the first place? That's scary. Yeah. That's terrifying.
And we're talking 1938. So she was born 19 years before that. So we're not talking about a lot of women in the workplace. So, I mean, she was like a trailblazer. No. She going through school and learning these skills. And then in 1938, having the skills to have a job in the business world was pretty remarkable for a young lady. And it makes it even more tragic that, she's going off to look for adventure or her first real job. And she, the sawmill murder. My God.
Right. So.
Well, it's not all just murders and things like that in the book. Earlier,
but it doesn't get any brighter. So that's to be fun. I thought you were going to say, but things are looking up. No, actually, they don't. They don't ever look.
There's no marshmallows in the hot chocolate. For this book. But you do a fantastic job of going through later in the book and talking about tragic events that happen around the holidays. And these events would be tragic no matter what time of year they happen, even if it was June 1st. But the fact that all these happened right around Christmas break, and so many of them, like I said earlier, happened in Chicago. Like we start off like in 1887. And Troy, I really appreciated this. In 1887, now we just kind of think, oh, we can go to Target. We can get a tree. We can get a Christmas tree. We could go to the grocery store and there's fresh cut ones there just delivered right to the grocery store. We don't even have to go, into the woods. We don't have to go and cut down our own tree. Well, in 1887, loggers and I don't even know what you'd say. Who would it be? Not even a logger, just
lumberjacks. Lumberjacks.
Thank you for the word. Lumberjacks would set out on expedition for weeks and get on these boats and go out into the timberland and cut down trees and put thousands of them on these boats, these barges, and then deliver them. They bring them back to Chicago and sell them. And these rickety old ships. So we're talking about the Christmas tree.
The Christmas tree ship
of 1887.
Yeah, this is the only story in this book that, while ends in tragedy, has any kind of bright spot or hope to it at all. Is this story, because the Christmas tree ship was such a fantastic tradition in Chicago for so long before things went terrible. I mean, because we think now about Christmas trees and we just, we take them for granted. But, in the 1850s, when Christmas trees first became popular, thanks to Queen Victoria, and it kind of spreading over here, you couldn't get a Christmas tree anywhere, especially in Chicago, because it's a city built on a swamp. So they didn't have Christmas trees. So when you had these two brothers, Herman and August Schunemann, who, decided to go into the Christmas tree business, people loved them. I mean, they just adored these guys, their whole entire families. The family would come down, they'd make wreaths and garland and things for people. And they'd come down and spend, people would come and buy a Christmas tree for 75 cents or $1, which was in 1887. It was a decent amount of money. It certainly paid their way to buy these rickety boats they were buying. They figured they didn't have far to go, right? I mean, they're only going from Chicago up to Michigan. They're just going across the lake. So it didn't have to be anything they'd have to spend too much money on, although anyone in their right mind stays off the lake in late November. You just don't. I mean, you don't sail in those days. You didn't sail the Great Lakes in late November. So these guys were, they were adventure holics anyway. And it was, here's here's 3 weeks to get away from the family. And, I'm going to come back with a bunch of Christmas trees and everybody will be happy. And then it continues for years until 1912 when the ship just vanishes on the way home from Michigan. And, they're looking for him and they're late and okay, everybody's going to be a day or two late. And then it's a week or two late. And then they realize nobody's coming because they keep finding Christmas trees washing up on the Wisconsin shoreline. Yeah. And that was the end of the Christmas tree ship. But people rallied. People of Chicago rallied around them, and they eventually got another ship going, even though, Captain Herman was gone, and the family did the best they could to survive, and people took care of them, and they kept going until 1938. I mean, so it really, they continued to, this is like the only hopeful story in the book, even though, of course, there is a ghost story about the Rouse Simmons ghost ship, but still, while a tragedy, it was a Christmas tragedy that I had to include, and it's not nearly as dark as the other ones. So, hey, everybody, there's your bright spot. Just wait till you get to the Christmas tree ship, and then it's all downhill from there. So. Yeah,
but just an interesting bit of history, though. Just talking about, how, like you said, we take Christmas trees for granted nowadays, and and what it took to get them into your town, into your port, and then later into your living room. But
yeah, there were no artificial trees back then.
So that was 1880s in Chicago. And then later in the book, you start talking about like the Iroquois theater in Chicago and these fires. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to have an author by the name of Scott James on, and he wrote about the station nightclub fire when the band Great White got on stage.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, he wrote a remarkable book about that. And there's so many parallels to these stories of people being trapped in theaters and, the rush to get out. And now that we have these fire codes and things, but that didn't help 20 years ago, and it certainly did not help in 1903 in Chicago.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And especially since I hate to say it this way because I love Chicago, so I hate to disparage it. So I tend to disparage it in a fun way. But there's often so many of these stories about Chicago, especially when it comes to disasters, because Chicago has such a reputation for being, let's just say, loose with everything. I mean, there's a reason that this theater opened far ahead of schedule. And it opened with, exit doors that didn't work, fire escapes that hadn't been installed, sprinkler systems that somebody just decided was ugly and didn't want to put them in. And yet they still passed every inspection with flying colors and were able to open because, in those days, money changed a little hand here and there in Chicago, and that's all it took. Mm-hmm. Some free tickets and, for friends and family, and, you had yourself a theater. And this place, had only been open 6 weeks when the fire took place, and it's a packed house with a huge oversold standing room only crowd with another 400 cast members behind stage. So you're talking about like 2,000 people packed into a building, and a fire breaks out, and people rush for the exits, and they didn't like the owners didn't like the exit signs because they thought they were distracting, so they turned them off.
God.
And then the fire doors that were there were supposed to be these state-of-the-art doors that could be opened and empty the theater in like 5 minutes, but unfortunately, no one knew how to work them, because only a couple of the ushers had been shown, and a couple of those guys took off running when the fire started. So they weren't there to unlock the doors. And so people couldn't get out the exit doors. So they smashed each other, and they piled on top of each other. And some of the doors opened inward, and they piled up 10 people deep, trying to get out, and suffocated that way. And, just to make sure that the balcony seat people up in the cheap seats didn't come downstairs during the intermissions, they decided to lock the gates on the staircases. And then the ushers fled the building and forgot to open the gates. Right. So the hundreds of people who were in the balcony can now not get out. So they run for the fire escapes, which the lower balcony fire escape, those had been finished, but the one to the top fire escape had not. So when people open the door to go out, they find themselves 50 feet in the air on a concrete platform with no way to get down. So people start jumping, or they start climbing across a ladder that some painters in a building on the other side of the alley slide across to them until in the winter weather in the ice, it slides off and somebody dies. And then you have 150 bodies lying on the ground, and the newspaper reporters, because, those guys are, a bunch of guys with hearts of gold, decide to call the alleyway Death Alley because of how many bodies they found there. Oh. I mean, are you really surprised that this place is haunted? I mean, we were talking about 612 people died in this fire. It is still today, from 1903 to today, still the largest amount of death in any theater fire in the United States in our history.
Yeah.
Because of a lot of things that could have easily have been avoided. I mean, not to mention, and I don't know that it could have been avoided, but, when you're using open flames for your lights, that seems like an issue to me, but what do I know? But and your asbestos curtain that's going to come down and stop the fire from spreading into the audience. But turns out the asbestos curtain was too expensive. So we just got a curtain that was made out of canvas and linseed oil. That's not going to burn. And so, all this stuff that they did and all the corners they cut and the bribes that they passed and, everything that was unfinished killed people, and when the fire was over, they indicted everybody that was involved in the theater, every owner, every manager, the fire chief, the safety inspectors, even the mayor of Chicago was indicted, and not a single person was ever punished. There were hundreds of lawsuits, not a single one ever collected, because they just dissolved the company and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Chicago. Unfortunately, that's the Chicago way, or at least it was. I'm going to go with was. I'm not going to stand behind the fact that it's not still that way. Let's just go with was 1903 and say that that's how it was back then. I'm saying that with a grin on my face that no one can see, but let's just leave it there and say that that's what happens. And then you wonder why there are so many tragedies in Chicago history. Well, that would be a big part of it. So that could be a story in itself.
Yeah.
So.
And then I was reading in your book, like in Michigan in 1913, that Italian hall, there wasn't even a fire. Somebody just yelled fire.
Someone yelled fire.
And there was the panic. And once again, more people die from getting trampled and stepped on and crushed, and just that mass of humanity trying to make the way to the almost non-existent exits than get burned. But yeah, that was 70 some odd people died.
Yeah. And these are all good reasons why we have exits that work now, why we have, people ask, oh, well, what's with all the safety stuff? Now you understand why all these exits are required. And, people always say, your First Amendment rights are great, but you can't yell fire in a crowded building. That's why, because people died. Yeah. When you have guys who come in who are trying to bust up a union and come in and start yelling fire in the middle of a union Christmas party, and people die trying to get out of the place, that's why you can't yell fire in a crowded building unless there's actually a fire.
And once again, you set the stage masterfully when you're writing about. You were writing about the situation of the unions and how they had to strike and how all that was progressing and everything. And then it comes time, Christmas Eve back in 1913, you did a masterful job of telling this, why those people were gathered, not just what happened during that night, but what led to that. And they never, they never caught the guy that was screaming fire and caused that panic and created that tragedy where 73 people without a flame, got crushed to death in a theater by their fellow man. Man. Yeah.
Well, and it's, and then, you've got the fire in Oklahoma in that little school, it's all started by accident. Again, one entrance to a school building, windows that are wired closed. You have a Christmas party going on, packed house, overcrowded house, packed with people. And you've got open flames on a Christmas tree because they didn't have any electric lights, not those kind of lights for a tree. So you've got open flames on a tree and a kid in a Santa suit, some teenage kid wearing a Santa suit accidentally bumps up against a tree and starts a fire that kills 36 people and wipes out entire families just because of an accident, that no one was prepared for. Again, you come back to that question. Is it any wonder there are ghost stories that go along with these things? It's not a surprise.
Yeah, the tragedy and the sorrow and just the horrible emotions that come out in a situation like that. And here's one, and people are like, "Wow, all these stories you're giving away. You're giving away the whole book." No,
we're leaving a lot of them out.
Oh man, it's fantastic. But there's one story in particular. A lot of stories in particular, but there's one that you wrote the way you wrote it, and so forgive me if if my recollection isn't as sharp as it should be. But you were talking about a train crash in 1876 in Ohio, and just talking about how, this guy really put not the gas on, but, like really made the train kind of go, and it's chugging. And then all of a sudden it got really easy for the train. And that's because behind the train, the bridge collapsed and it like swept away most of the train. I'm just that whole story about the tragedy and how the train fell and how it disappeared into the night and into the mist and the snow and everything. My God. I mean, just a story like most of these stories I had no idea happened.
There's elements to so many of the stories that, when I would research this stuff, and there are elements of the stories that really intrigue me or really move me in some way, I try to enhance that as much as I can, because I think if it did it for me, it might do it for someone else. And thinking about, all of these people on this train and, when it falls, the way that it fell and what the people talked about in the survivors, talked about in the newspaper articles that I found about the feeling of weightlessness and then the crash. And then most of them dying, not because the train fell, but because it landed in the water and they drowned, or they burned to death because of the open stoves that were in the train cars at the time, and then caught on fire and turned, a crash into, they survived the crash, but then burned to death because it turned into an inferno, and just, and the things that could have easily have been fixed in so many cases. The Our Lady of Angels story is a great example of, somebody who got away with sloppy safety. And we're talking about the 1950s here. And, calling in fires in the fire department going to the wrong address because they told him to go to Our Lady of Angels and they went to the church instead of the school, and a fire that had been burning all day long, but nobody knew it. And all it took was a little air to come in, and then it burns into the wall, sweeps through a building, and just completely sneaks up on everybody. They were, and there was no way they could have been prepared for that part of it. But the safety standards were not, they were for the time, they were fine, but that's how we learn. That's how we change things and make things better. Kids couldn't get to the fire escape, so they're jumping out of windows, or being hauled out of windows by firefighters, or just by volunteers, a couple of guys who grab a ladder out of a garage. That was one that I wanted to accentuate, like the heroics of that story. Yeah. The people in it who are really heroes. This just Joe Blow, who has a cousin who has a kid that goes to the school and risks his life to save as many kids as he can. And some of the nuns who risk their lives just to get their kids out of the schools, or get them out of the classrooms, and getting them down the stairs, forcing them to slide downstairs and things, but that was a case of where, the things that moved me, I tried to accentuate in the stories. And, I felt like that was something that was important for a book that was about the holidays. Let's focus on the things that, are going to be important to people. And that's what I tried to do.
Yeah. And some of my favorite things in true crime books is not, I don't really care what Ted Bundy was thinking or what Ted Bundy did, or, I don't care about that. Exactly. I like reading about, the motivation of the detectives, or those kinds of things, like how they stopped the crime or how they reacted to the crime. Or so when we're talking about like this Lady of Angels fire from 1958 at this Catholic school and church, there's a lot of parallels between like a 9/11 kind of situation where, these people are in the building and it's burning behind them. And because of the screens on the windows and they're up, a couple floors up and all these things, they are forced with the decision of either jumping to great peril or burning to death. And like you said, much like the first responders in 9/11, you've got like these guys grabbing ladders wherever they can find them, whether they're long enough or not, risking their own personal safety. The nuns running back into the building because they counted their children outside the building and there's still a couple inside, and I felt bad for, some of these sisters that were, I just kind of picture them in their classroom and yes, they were having their kids sit down and pray, but it was because they didn't want them to panic and they didn't want them to freak out. Even though was that the right decision? Should they try to get the hell out of there? Maybe. I mean, yes.
Maybe. Or maybe there was no way out, and that was the best thing they could think of to do.
God.
There's also that.
Yeah,
I know.
But yeah, the heroics too. The guys coming and just dropping everything just to catch children on the ground as they were leaping away from the fire.
Yeah. Right, 2 and 3 floors up.
Amazing. Amazing. Oh. So Troy,
it's not all bad.
so in our time that we have remaining, you wrote this book, and I'm so glad you did, because I was looking for this kind of conversation. I was looking for this kind of book, just to because I love history and I love listening to people or reading these stories. No matter how grim they are, it's just it's a part of the fabric of American culture and everything. And you're right there doing the research and writing this great book. And like I said, I was very excited when you started teasing it, and this cover and everything, man. April Slaughter did a great job putting the artwork and everything together.
Does. Yeah,
you just got a great style, not only with your writing, but how you present yourself, how you brand it, and your publishing company, American Hauntings Inc.
Yep. Yeah, I do it because I love it. I can't imagine doing anything else. So, I try to, with the books look nice, April puts her heart into them, and, I try to do the same. And, I love what I do. Like I said, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And so it's just, I had a story that or a lot of stories that I wanted to tell. Some I've told before, most of these in one way or another, I've told them before, but I wanted to do them differently for this particular book and really focus on how important the holidays were to these stories, and to give people something that would be a little different. We're force fed, 30 days or probably more than 30 days of the Hallmark Channel. And that's not, that's very nice. And I'm sure that's very Christmassy for a lot of people, but a lot of us kind of get left out of that end of things. And so we want to look at something a little bit differently. So I guess I wanted to do something for my people, my people when it comes to the holidays, to give them something that they can look forward to and have some fun with. So the response has been much better than I had even expected. So I'm really happy about that. And, which is good, because let's be honest, this is a niche book.
Oh, yeah.
Up January, I'm not going to sell any till next year, and that's okay. I get it, but believe me, you're hearing me talking about this a lot every December now.
Right.
So, for now, it has been a lot of fun to have put this book out, and to get the response that I have from people has been very cool. And I've got a huge event coming up where I'm doing a lot of these stories and dinner and everything. And I'm finally off for the holiday season to, I don't know, sacrifice goats or something. I don't know. Who knows what we're going to do for Christmas now after this book came out. Right. It's hard to say.
Right. And what's great about what I love about you too, man, you write these fantastic books, and you have an impressive library, impressive credits of all these books that you've written, but you're also so well known for your live events. You're so well known for just all the things that you do besides just sitting behind your computer and typing, you host these great events. And since the last time we talked, I think did you open up? Tell me about your ballroom or your.
Oh yeah, we started. We've got there's an old hotel down in Alton, Illinois, that's been a part of our tour and stuff down there for years. But we did open up a ballroom in that building that is just for live events. We have a bookstore in there, and then we do. I don't know. It varies. Depends on the time of year. Usually several, at least two, sometimes as many as 5 and 6, depending on the time of the year. But we do a lot of dinner events and things there where we do an evening with, this one will be the Spirits of Christmas, but we do everything from Lizzie Borden to H.H. Holmes to the Donner Party, which dinner with the Donner Party is always a hit.
Wait, tell me about that.
I know we do it. I do it every year at the end of January. I try to coincide it with when the first relief arrived to rescue the starving. The first ones arrived to rescue the starving settlers, and I always want to serve ribs, but our caterer won't do it. But I always try to keep it themed in some way. But so we do a lot of different ones, but that one's always the one that gets all the laughs.
Yeah.
I can guarantee when I advertise it, there would be lots and lots of, evening with the Donner Party thing. So, I always tell everybody, bring an appetite, but it is, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I like doing them. It's fun to interact with people as much as I like to, sit behind my keyboard and write. The couple of years of pandemic really made me appreciate getting out and doing things with people, and having that live interaction, which is just it's always a lot of fun. Well, okay, not always, but usually 99% of the time, it's a lot of fun to interact with people. So
yeah, I had my first live event for Necronomicast this year, and it was really good to plan something where people could come to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying the pandemic is over, but we're at a point now. We're at a point now where we can go out and have live events and do things. If you feel
we can manage it right. Correct.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So I'm just going through your website in the time we have remaining, AmericanHauntingsInc.com, Inc, I-N-K, like the black stuff. And I'm just looking at you got, your ghost books, your ghost hunts, you got a great podcast too, that we didn't even talk about yet.
Yeah. We've got the Haunted America conference coming up in June, which we do every year. It's our big summer event. This is our 26th year for the conference. And we moved to a bigger venue this year. And finally, as people have been asking us, move to a bigger place. This is too crowded. Yeah. So we did. So we're really excited about it. So that's coming up. God, it'll be here before we know it. It's crazy. So everything, I mean, I can't even believe it's December already. What happened to October? What happened to the fall, man? It's just went. So
I know. I'm working on my second live event for next October, and people are like, you're already starting to work on it. I'm like, it's only 10 months away.
Yeah, it's going to be here before we know it. I know, it's crazy. It's insane how fast things go.
Well, man, you're like an inspiration to me. I love these guys that hustle and work, and you're not just cranking stuff out just for the sake of putting out content.
Honestly, I'm not a hustler. I'm just not. This is just what I like to do. So I just do what I feel like doing all the time, and it's like play.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like work. I know people say that kind of stuff all the time, but I really mean it. It's not like work. So I don't, everybody like, oh, whoa, man, you're really motivated. No, not really. I mean, I'll sit down for an hour during the day just because I want to crack open a book. So I'm really not that motivated. I just like doing what I do. So I just keep doing it. I'd be bored if I didn't. So, why not?
Dude, it shows. It shows on every page. So everybody, I've had just the pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to Troy Taylor once again on the program, and his newest book, it just came out weeks ago. I'm holding it in my hand. One Bleak Midwinter Night. We'll have links on the show page, how you can get a hold of Troy and all his other stuff that he's got going on, all his tours and his dinners and his live events, and his You got coffee, you got tea, you got all kinds of stuff. and just one
Now I
terrific.
stay awake to do all this stuff.
That's right. One,
Coffee and
yeah,
tea,
talking to
right?
me at night. Yeah, but Troy, man, thanks again. And
Yeah.
fantastic book. My very, very best to you in 2023. Continued success to you, my friend. And you just do great stuff. And I'm just proud to have a quality guest on the show that writes
Thanks.
so well and just knows his stuff. And you know, when I say hustle, I mean like you grind, like you work. You're not afraid to put in the work and the research. And
No, that's true. I like that too. So there it is. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
there he is, everybody. Mr. Troy Taylor, episode 241 of Necronomicast. I love Troy. I love talking to him. His books are so good, man. Hey, man. So that's it, everybody, for another year of Necronomicast. Started in January with episode 216 with Dr. Catherine Ramsland. Fast forward 25 episodes to Troy Taylor. So next, I'm going to present to you all a best of episode. Some of the highlights of the past 25 episodes, guaranteed to entertain, along with clips from the live event with John Tenney, Johnny Hauser, and Jamie Nestrel, held at the Benson Theater. I'll have a special announcement about my next live event at the Benson Theater. And as always, I appreciate the listens, the likes, the subscribes. Thank you all. I hope you have a great holiday season and have a happy new year. From all of us here at the Necronomicast, worldwide,